when I went up to go to his office, they had big banners up. Welcome David Allan Coe, ALLENCOLE.
David Allan Coe, the outlaw who refused to play by Nashville's rules, is a man whose songs fueled legends and whose voice carried the grit of rebellion. But while the world fell in love with him, backstage, things were terribly wrong. The rights to his most valuable songs slipped from his hands. The industry that once feared him stopped speaking his name, and the rebel who once lived louder than life now spends his days in near silence. How did a figure so central to outlaw country music end up not inducted into the genre's Hall of Fame? The story of David Allan Coe is heartbreaking and darker than you realize. The rise of a rebel. David Allan Coe's name is etched into the history of country music as one of the most controversial and unconventional figures the genre has ever seen. His songs, his life story, and his refusal to conform to industry expectations influenced the sound and the attitude of outlaw country. He achieved heights that most aspiring musicians could only dream of, yet the challenges he faced along the way were heavy, and the path he walked shaped both his rise and the struggles that would follow. Coe was born on September 6, 1939, in Akron, Ohio, a working-class city known for its factories. From the beginning, his life was marked by instability and trouble. By the age of 9, he was sent to reform school at Star Commonwealth for boys in Michigan due to repeated behavioral problems. This would be the start of a pattern that defined much of his early years: constant run-ins with the law, authority figures, and institutions that tried but failed to control him. As he entered his teenage years, Coe's rebellion against rules and structure deepened. He spent much of his youth cycling in and out of correctional facilities, with stints that exposed him to a world far removed from the traditional upbringing most country singers had. Eventually, he ended up serving a 3-year sentence at the Ohio Penitentiary, an experience that would shape both his worldview and the music he would later create. During his time in prison, Coe began to cultivate the stories that would later define his legend. He often claimed that he had once been placed on death row for killing another inmate, presenting himself as a man hardened by extreme circumstances. Over time, however, this story was debunked. Records showed that Coe had been incarcerated for burglary and for possession of indecent materials rather than for what he claimed. While this revelation undercut part of the myth he had built around himself, it did not erase the fact that his prison years left a permanent mark on his art. One of the pivotal moments in Coe's life came behind bars when he met Screamin' Jay Hawkins, the flamboyant rhythm and blues singer known for his theatrical stage presence. Hawkins encouraged him to take his chaotic experiences and channel them into songwriting. This advice planted the seed for Coe's eventual career. Music became not only an outlet but also a pathway out of the cycle of imprisonment that had consumed his early life. But when Coe was released from prison in 1967, he did not immediately find stability. Instead, he pursued music with the same unrelenting energy that had once fueled his rebellion. He moved to Nashville, Tennessee, the heart of country music, but he arrived with little money and few connections. For a time, he lived in a hearse parked outside the Ryman Auditorium, the legendary venue known as the home of the Grand Ole Opry. That image of a young, determined songwriter living in a funeral car outside the most famous stage in country music captured the essence of his determination and eccentricity. Thankfully, his persistence soon paid off. While busking on the streets of Nashville and playing his songs to anyone who would listen, he caught the attention of Shelby Singleton, the influential record producer who had founded Plantation Records. Singleton signed Coe and helped release his debut album, Penitentiary Blues, in 1970. The record was raw, filled with reflections of his years behind bars, and it announced him as a different kind of voice in country music that did not shy away from darkness or uncomfortable truths. Coe also developed a stage persona that set him apart from every other country singer of the time. He began appearing in rhinestone suits and wearing a Lone Ranger-style mask, calling himself the mysterious rhinestone cowboy. This unusual blend of outlaw bravado and eccentric fashion made him a striking presence in an industry that often prized conformity. By the mid-1970s, Coe's career reached a major milestone when he signed with Columbia Records. In 1975, he released the album Once Upon a Rhyme, which became one of his most enduring hits. During this time, he found himself aligned with figures like Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson, artists who were pushing back against the polished Nashville sound in favor of raw, authentic expression. While Coe never achieved the same mainstream acceptance as Jennings or Nelson, he became a vital figure on the fringe of the movement. His songs, often filled with blunt honesty and lived experience, resonated with listeners who wanted something different from the standard country formula. By the late 1970s, David Allan Coe had established himself as both a gifted songwriter and a performer with an unmistakable identity. But behind the scenes, challenges were beginning to build. The same restless energy and unconventional lifestyle that had fueled his rise would also contribute to conflicts, financial instability, and a career path that was as turbulent as it was groundbreaking. The financial fallout. Despite the fame David Allan Coe earned as a songwriter and performer, money was a constant source of turmoil. His career highs never seemed to translate into lasting financial stability, and by the time the 2000s came around, the weight of debts, legal troubles, and personal obligations began to crush him. The first major blow came when Coe filed for bankruptcy. At the core of the filing were tax debts that had accumulated over years of irregular income, poor financial planning, and an unconventional lifestyle that left little room for organization. Musicians often rely on royalties, touring, and publishing rights for long-term financial security. But in Coe's case, those resources were either mismanaged or sacrificed. His unpredictable career path meant he did not enjoy the same steady revenue streams that kept other country artists afloat. The troubles only grew worse over the next years, as Coe's long-running issues with the Internal Revenue Service came to a head. He pled guilty to tax evasion, admitting that he had failed to pay taxes on significant earnings. Court documents revealed that he owed nearly $1 million to the Internal Revenue Service, a staggering figure that reflected years of neglecting obligations to the federal government. For a man who had once written songs that became staples of the country music catalog, the reality of standing before a judge for financial crimes was a stark reminder of how far his fortunes had fallen. One of the most damaging financial blows in Coe's life came from the fallout of his bankruptcy proceedings. As part of the legal process, the rights to all of the songs he had written prior to 1984, including some of his most valuable work, were sold off. That catalog contained career-defining pieces, among them Take This Job and Shove It, a song made famous by Johnny Paycheck that became a working-class anthem across the country. The catalog was sold for only $25,000, a figure shockingly low compared to the millions in publishing revenue those songs would later generate. What made the loss even harder was the fact that Coe reportedly did not fully realize what was happening until it was too late. The transfer of his song rights was tied to the bankruptcy case, and once completed, there was no way to reverse it. The royalties that might have provided him steady income for the rest of his life were gone, leaving him without the financial cushion that most artists depend on once touring slows down. On top of his struggles with taxes and publishing, Coe's personal life added another heavy layer of debt. In 2007, reports surfaced that he owed more than $300,000 in unpaid child support. The story drew public scrutiny and further cemented his reputation as a man living on the edge of financial disaster. Child support debts not only damaged his reputation, but also added legal pressure and interest penalties, compounding an already desperate financial picture. These overlapping debts created a cycle that was nearly impossible to escape. Bankruptcy may have offered temporary relief, but the ongoing child support obligations and back taxes continued to follow him. The sale of his song catalog provided short-term cash, but stripped away the possibility of long-term security. And when he finally faced the tax evasion charges, the full scope of his financial mismanagement became clear. For fans who admired Coe's music and saw him as a symbol of outlaw freedom, the reality of his financial collapse was difficult to reconcile. His songs had spoken to the struggles of ordinary people, yet his own inability to manage success left him vulnerable to the hardships he once sang about. By the time his tax case was settled, Coe's reputation had been scarred, and his finances were in tatters. The man who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with legends of outlaw country was left scrambling to keep himself afloat. And while his struggles with money were devastating, they were only one part of the complicated life he led. Away from the stage and the courtroom, his relationships and personal entanglements added a new layer of drama that shaped the next chapter of his story. Love-life drama. David Allan Coe's defiance on stage and in his personal life often reflected the same turbulence. Relationships were never simple for him, and the choices he made in love carried as much drama as the songs he sang. His approach to commitment was shaped by heartbreak, rebellion, and a philosophy that often shocked outsiders. Coe's disturbing views on relationships began after his second divorce. He later confessed that the experience convinced him never to become emotionally involved with a woman again. That vow was less about rejecting companionship and more about shielding himself from the pain of betrayal. To Coe, the heartbreak of divorce felt like a wound too deep to risk repeating. And so, instead of pursuing traditional commitment, he surrounded himself with women on his own terms. At one point, Coe was living under the same roof with several women he referred to as his wives. It was not a legal arrangement, and it had little to do with the conventions of marriage. Rather, it was his way of ensuring that no single person could hold too much power over him emotionally. The setup blurred the lines between personal relationships and a kind of protective buffer that kept intimacy at arm's length while still allowing him the company he craved. When questioned about this unconventional arrangement, Coe justified it by claiming he was a Mormon. However, the statement was more symbolic than doctrinal, since his practice bore little resemblance to the faith's traditions or teachings. Instead, it seemed to serve as a convenient explanation for a lifestyle that defied mainstream expectations. Coe himself later admitted that his decision to live with multiple women was a defense mechanism. In his own words, "I surrounded myself with them so that I wouldn't have to be involved with any one person." It was a revealing statement, showing that beneath the bravado and the rebellious exterior was a man deeply wary of vulnerability. Despite his vow and his carefully constructed defenses, Coe eventually broke his own rule. He married again, allowing himself to believe in the possibility of trust and stability, but that relationship unraveled quickly and painfully. Within just 9 months, his wife filed for divorce, a turn of events Coe described as a betrayal. The experience left him more guarded than ever and reinforced his reluctance to commit. Each failed relationship added another scar to an already complicated personal history. Over the years, Coe married at least 3 times, and many of those relationships ended in legal disputes. Divorce proceedings, property battles, and the weight of financial obligations bled into his personal life. These disputes not only deepened his mistrust of commitment, but also added to the financial troubles that were already haunting him. The same outlaw spirit that made him resistant to authority also made stability in his personal life almost impossible to maintain. Yet amid the chaos, one relationship endured. His current wife, Kimberly Hastings, has been by his side for over a decade. Unlike many of his earlier relationships, this partnership proved lasting. Kimberly often accompanied him on stage, standing not only as a presence in his performances, but also as a stabilizing force in his later life. Coe's love life also left its mark on the next generation. He's the father of Tyler Mahan Coe, who carved his own place in the country music world as the creator of an acclaimed podcast. Tyler's work examines the history of country music with a sharp, unflinching lens, and his success in storytelling carries echoes of the honesty and grit that defined his father's career. While their relationship has had its complexities, the fact that Tyler became a prominent voice in preserving country music history adds another dimension to David Allan Coe's personal legacy. But Coe's romances were not isolated from the rest of his career. They intersected with his public image, his financial struggles, and his reputation in country music. Each chapter of his personal life became another layer in the myth of David Allan Coe, the outlaw who lived by his own rules, even when those rules led to heartbreak. But if his relationships were marked by emotional battles, his professional life was filled with a different kind of conflict. Beyond the stage and the home, Coe became known for controversies and feuds that fueled his image as one of country music's most divisive figures. Fame, fire, and fallout. David Allan Coe's career was built on rebellion, but that same defiance often pushed him beyond the boundaries of what the country music world could accept. While his talent as a songwriter and his contributions to outlaw country earned him a place in the genre's history, his artistic and personal choices ensured that he remained a controversial figure. Fame brought him recognition, but it also came with fire and fallout that left him isolated from the very industry he helped shape. One of the most divisive aspects of Coe's career came from the music he released outside of mainstream channels. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, he recorded a series of underground albums that were never intended for radio or commercial distribution. Among them were Nothing Sacred and Underground Album, records filled with explicit and racially charged lyrics. These albums, sold through biker magazines and by mail order, featured material that critics and listeners alike described as offensive, vulgar, and in many cases indefensible. The backlash was swift and lasting. Many accused Coe of racism and promoting shock value over substance. While he defended the albums as crude humor or artistic freedom, the controversy cemented his reputation as an outsider in the country music world. Unlike his outlaw contemporaries, who pushed back against Nashville's polished sound while still finding mainstream acceptance, Coe crossed lines that permanently damaged his credibility with the industry. His refusal to conform extended far beyond lyrics. Coe developed a reputation for behavior that alienated Nashville executives and record labels. The long-term consequences were clear. Despite his influence on outlaw country and his role in shaping hits that defined an era, David Allan Coe has never been inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. While artists with similar legacies, such as Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson, became celebrated icons, Coe remained on the margins, admired by some fans, but shunned by the institutions that controlled recognition and prestige. As the years passed, his career became marked by industry alienation, personal feuds, and fractured relationships. In 2013, Coe was involved in a serious car accident in Florida when the SUV he was driving ran a red light and was struck by a tractor trailer. He survived but was hospitalized with broken ribs and other injuries. The accident became a turning point in his later life. In the aftermath, Coe claimed that nearly everyone had abandoned him except for his wife, Kimberly. To him, she was the one person who remained loyal while others distanced themselves. Yet this loyalty came with complications. His son, Tyler Mahan Coe, publicly accused Kimberly of manipulating his father and contributing to the fallout with longtime band members. The accusations created a rift not only within Coe's family, but also within his circle of collaborators, many of whom walked away during this period. But the tensions extended beyond family disputes. Coe openly criticized some of the very figures who had once stood alongside him in the outlaw movement. He reportedly fell out with Waylon Jennings, a man who had been central to the rise of outlaw country. This only widened the distance between Coe and the community that had once embraced him. Instead of celebrating his shared history with outlaw legends, Coe found himself estranged and increasingly out of step with the artists who defined the movement. Estrangement also affected his relationships with band members and close associates. After his accident, stories emerged of musicians and crew leaving his side, citing conflicts with Kimberly, and disagreements over how Coe's career was being managed. To some, this represented the final unraveling of his outlaw family, the community of collaborators that had helped sustain his career for decades. Yet even as controversies piled up, Coe continued to embody the contradictions that had always defined him. He was a songwriter of undeniable talent, a performer capable of captivating audiences, and a man whose refusal to bend to authority remained consistent to the end. But those same traits fueled the controversies that prevented him from ever receiving the recognition his contributions might otherwise have earned. And after the storms of controversy faded, Coe entered a different phase of his life. One marked not by headlines or public feuds, but by quiet years away from the spotlight. The quiet years. As David Allan Coe entered the later stages of his life, the fire and chaos that had defined his career gave way to something far quieter. The outlaw spirit that once fueled his music and his reputation had been worn down by age, health struggles, and the weight of a lifetime spent living on his own terms. In 2019, Coe underwent knee replacement surgery. For most people, such a procedure might be routine, but for a performer who had built his career on the energy of live shows, it marked the beginning of a steep physical decline. Recovery was slow, and although he returned to the stage for a handful of performances, he no longer moved with the same vigor. His body was beginning to show the toll of decades spent on the road, in bars, and in constant conflict with authority and circumstance. By 2021, his health took an even darker turn. He was hospitalized with a severe respiratory illness that required both oxygen support and a feeding tube. Doctors monitored him closely as his condition worsened, and it was clear to those around him that the outlaw who had once seemed larger than life was now frail and dependent on medical care. The man who had once prided himself on independence now needed constant support, much of it provided by his wife, Kimberly Hastings. She became his caregiver as he fought through repeated hospital stays, breathing difficulties, and a body that no longer responded to the demands he had once pushed it through with ease. These health struggles had a direct impact on his public presence. Coe, who had once thrived on the stage, all but disappeared from view. He released no new music after 2021, a silence that spoke volumes about his condition. His official website fell inactive, leaving fans without updates or announcements of tours. Where once his name had been a constant presence in outlaw country circles, he was now rarely mentioned except in passing or in reference to his earlier contributions. The few public glimpses that emerged painted a sobering picture. He appeared far removed from the flamboyant figure who had once worn rhinestones and masks while challenging the Nashville establishment. His voice, once powerful and unrestrained, weakened significantly after his illnesses, leaving him unable to perform live with the same energy that had defined his career. The concerts and recordings that had once been his lifeline were now memories rather than ongoing pursuits. In this quieter life, Coe reportedly settled in Ormond Beach, Florida, where he lived with Kimberly. The coastal town offered privacy and distance from the music industry that had long rejected him, while also providing a place of stability in his final years. It was a far cry from the chaos of his Nashville days, but it reflected a reality he could no longer escape. His body and his voice were no longer strong enough to keep up with the demands of the stage. Coe had written songs that shaped country music, but many of them became famous through the voices of others. A striking example is Tennessee Whiskey, a song he originally recorded but that later became a hit for George Jones in the 1980s and decades later was revitalized by Chris Stapleton. Stapleton's version turned into a cultural phenomenon, streamed hundreds of millions of times and performed at sold-out arenas, yet few casual listeners knew the song's roots traced back to Coe. The situation was made more painful by the fact that he no longer owned the rights to those songs. Earlier financial troubles and bankruptcy proceedings stripped him of royalties that might have provided support in these later years. While Tennessee Whiskey became one of the most beloved country songs of the modern era, Coe received no meaningful benefit from its success. The song's legacy grew larger, but Coe's connection to it remained overshadowed and largely forgotten in the mainstream narrative. The same was true of other works. Songs that carried his fingerprints were celebrated in the hands of artists like Johnny Paycheck, George Jones, and Chris Stapleton. But Coe's own versions remained buried in history, rarely streamed, covered, or licensed. For many younger fans, his role in shaping these classics was invisible, hidden beneath the louder legacies of those who had taken his words to the top of the charts. For Coe, the quiet years became a time defined less by what he was doing in the present and more by what had been left behind. His health kept him away from the spotlight. His financial past robbed him of the royalties that might have supported him, and his controversial career choices limited the recognition he might otherwise have received from institutions like the Country Music Hall of Fame. And while the quiet years revealed the full cost of his struggles, they also set the stage for the sobering truth about where David Allan Coe is now. Where's Coe now? David Allan Coe is alive at 86 years old, but his life looks nothing like the wild and defiant years that made him famous. Once known for his rhinestone suits, controversial songs, and uncompromising attitude, He now lives a private life, far removed from the spotlight that once defined his career. Financially, his estimated net worth sits at around $1.5 million, a modest sum compared to many of his contemporaries, but still enough to provide stability in his later years. Much of this figure reflects the remnants of his touring income, occasional royalties, and the assets he managed to retain after decades of financial turmoil. For a man who was once forced to sell his song catalog during bankruptcy proceedings and faced nearly $1 million in tax debts, the survival of any fortune at all is remarkable. Unlike many modern musicians, Coe has no active social media presence. His name surfaces online only through nostalgic posts from longtime fans who share old videos, photos, and memories of concerts. While these digital tributes keep his legacy alive among devoted listeners, Coe himself remains silent, offering no updates or direct engagement with the public. His place in the country music conversation is equally complicated. Within mainstream circles, he is almost invisible. He is rarely mentioned at Country Music Association awards, not included in Hall of Fame discussions, and rarely acknowledged in official retrospectives of the outlaw country movement. The controversies of his underground albums, combined with his abrasive reputation, ensured that Nashville's institutions would never embrace him fully, even as they celebrated his peers. Among fans and critics, opinions remain deeply divided. Some continue to revere him as a legend, pointing to the raw honesty of his songwriting and the influence he had on artists who came after him, while others view him through the lens of his offensive lyrics and volatile behavior, dismissing him as a cautionary tale of wasted potential. Yet in underground and alternative music circles, David Allan Coe is still considered foundational. His contributions to outlaw country are undeniable, and for those who value authenticity above polish, his legacy remains intact. He may live quietly now, far from stages and headlines, but the echoes of his music still ripple through country history. Do you think David Allan Coe should be inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame? Tell us in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen like this video and subscribe to our channel for more updates.